The morning of their trip began with a quiet excitement that filled the small apartment like a soft glow. The young girl had been awake long before the sun rose, staring at the ceiling, replaying in her mind all the little details her mother had shared about the place they were visiting. She had packed her bag the night before, checking it again and again, making sure her favorite little journal was tucked inside. It was a bright journal, covered in small stickers she collected over the years, and she liked to think it carried pieces of her personality. Everywhere she went, her mother moved through the apartment with an unhurried calm, the way she always did on important days. She prepared breakfast, double-checked their travel documents, reminded her daughter to drink some water before they left. The girl nodded, still hugging her colorful backpack, as if it were a living thing that needed comfort before the journey. She never liked to show it, but she often felt nervous in new places. Her mother understood that without the girl ever needing to explain it, and that understanding alone always made her feel a little braver. When they finally stepped outside, the cool morning air greeted them. The world seemed quieter than usual, as though it was giving them a gentle pathway forward. Their ride to the airport was peaceful, with the girl looking out the window, imagining what the plane would look like on the inside. She had flown before, but this time felt different. She felt older, more aware of things around her, more observant. She wanted to take in everything, the people, the sounds. The way the seats felt beneath her, at the airport, they moved through the crowds with practiced ease. People rushed in every direction. Business travelers walking with firm steps, families with small children trying to keep everyone together, couples standing close while looking at their phones. The girl watched them all with quiet interest. She liked to guess where everyone was going. She wondered who might be visiting relatives, who might be going on an adventure, who might be traveling for the very first time. Her mother held her hand as they made their way to security. The girl always felt slightly nervous here, but the officers were polite and everything went smoothly. When they reached their gate, they sat together near a large window where planes slowly crept across the tarmac. The girl pressed her nose lightly against the glass, watching one plane after another lift into the sky. She kept thinking how strange and amazing it was that something so big could rise so gently when it was finally time to board. She felt her stomach flutter with excitement. People began lining up, some standing impatiently, others chatting softly with their companions. When their group was called, she squeezed her mother's hand and followed her toward the jet bridge. She always loved this part. The long tunnel that connected the airport to the plane, the air inside felt cooler, and the hum of machinery echoed softly from somewhere above. The girl held her backpack tight in front of her, her small fingers gripping the straps. Her mother walked behind her, giving her space to lead the way while still staying close enough to offer comfort if needed, as they stepped onto the plane. A flight attendant greeted them with a warm smile. The girl smiled shyly back, her excitement mixed with a touch of nervousness. She looked around the cabin, noticing the dim lights above the seats and the rows stretching far back. She knew their seats were somewhere near the middle as they moved down the aisle. The girl walked slowly, careful not to bump into anyone. She admired the overhead bins, the small screens on the seat backs, and the soft sound of people settling into their seats. Some passengers were checking their phones, others adjusting their jackets or reaching for their bags. The girl tried to stay out of the way and keep pace with her mother when they reached the row where their seats were located. The girl paused to make sure she wasn't blocking anyone. That was when it happened quickly, unexpectedly, far louder than anyone needed to speak. A woman seated on the aisle looked directly at her backpack and scoffed. "Well, that's quite a childish bag for someone your age," she said, her voice sharp enough to make the girl's shoulders tense instantly. The comment was unnecessary. It came out of nowhere, delivered in a tone that sounded annoyed, almost as if the girl's existence had somehow inconvenienced her. For a moment, the girl couldn't even respond. She froze, staring at her backpack, as though it had betrayed her all around. The low hum of passengers settling in continued, but a few nearby people glanced up, their expressions shifting in subtle discomfort. Some looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't heard anything. Others looked briefly at the mother, as though expecting her to react. The girl felt her cheeks warm, and she lowered her head, suddenly wishing she could disappear into the floor. She clutched her backpack tighter, feeling embarrassed in a way she couldn't fully understand. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the way the woman's eyes had narrowed, the strange judgment in her voice. Her mother stepped closer, her expression calm, her movements gentle. She placed a soft hand on her daughter's back and nodded toward their seats, guiding her to sit down without saying a word to the woman. The girl could feel her heartbeat thumping in her ears as she slid into her seat by the window. She stared at her backpack, wondering why something she loved so much had become the reason. Someone embarrassed her. The woman who made the comment went back to adjusting her belongings as though nothing had happened. The girl avoided looking in her direction, instead focusing on the window. But even the comforting view outside couldn't stop the heavy feeling that settled inside her. Her mother took the seat beside her and quietly buckled her seatbelt. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything. She simply watched her daughter, the way her small chest rose and fell a little too quickly, the way her eyes remained fastened on the backpack in her lap. The mother leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Shh, are you okay?" Her voice was soft, warm, something the girl had always trusted. The girl swallowed, unsure how to answer. She felt embarrassed, but she didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want anyone, especially strangers, to think she was overreacting. She simply nodded, though her eyes stayed down. Her mother knew that nod wasn't real, but she didn't push. Instead, she gently reached for her daughter's hand and held it. The girl squeezed back, but even her small fingers felt hesitant. More passengers continued boarding, brushing past them, sliding their bags into overhead bins, greeting neighbors with polite nods. The flight attendants walked through the aisles, checking bags and making sure everyone was seated properly. But the girl felt disconnected from all of it. She was replaying the woman's comment in her mind over and over again. She felt small, almost invisible. Except for the part of her that now seemed to visible the part the stranger had pointed out and mocked. She wondered whether other people agreed with the woman. She wondered if her backpack made her look silly or immature. She wondered if she had made a mistake bringing it. Her mother adjusted her seatbelt and leaned back for a moment, her eyes drifting briefly toward the woman who had spoken. The woman was reading something on her phone, seemingly completely indifferent to the impact of her words. The mother's expression stayed composed, but inside she felt a mix of sadness and protectiveness. She knew her daughter had been hurt, and she also knew moments like this had the power to shape how children saw themselves. The girl pressed her forehead gently against the window, trying to distract herself by watching the airport workers outside. They moved with purpose, guiding carts, checking equipment, and loading luggage. She tried to focus on the things that usually fascinated her, but her mind kept drifting back to that comment. It lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake off. Her mother finally spoke again, her voice low and comforting. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said softly. The girl didn't respond, but she heard the words. She took a small breath, then another. She tried to believe what her mother said, but part of her still felt heavy. A flight attendant passed by to check on the overhead bins. She smiled when she saw the girl, though the girl didn't notice. Her mother noticed, though. She noticed everything, every small detail. Every tiny shift in her daughter's posture, every sign of hurt she was trying so hard to hide. The woman who made the comment opened a snack and crinkled the wrapper loudly. The noise made the girl flinch slightly. But her mother reached over subtly and rested a hand on her arm, grounding her. The plane continued to fill, but inside the girl's mind, the moment seemed stuck. Time moved, people moved, but her emotions stayed in the exact place where they had been when the comment first landed. Her mother leaned closer and whispered, "Look at me for a second." The girl turned her head slowly. Her mother's eyes were kind, steady, full of warmth. "We're going to talk about what happened," she said, "but not right now. First, I want you to breathe." The girl nodded, taking a slow breath in, letting it out just as slowly. Her mother guided her quietly through another. The girl followed, feeling a tiny bit of calm return, even though the woman who embarrassed her sat only inches away. Her mother's presence created a sense of safety around her, like a soft shield that nothing could break through. But the hurt was still there, and her mother could see that clearly. She knew part of the journey that day would not just be flying to their destination. It would also be helping her daughter understand something important. Something that would stay with her much longer than the memory of the stranger's careless remark. And that part of the journey was only just beginning. The girl sat quietly beside the window long after most passengers had taken their seats. Even though her mother tried to speak softly to her, the girl could still feel the weight of that single moment sitting heavily on her chest. It was strange how a few careless words from a stranger could follow her like a shadow, even though she had done nothing wrong. She kept tracing the outline of her backpack with her fingers, brushing over the patterns as if the familiar feel of it might calm her heartbeat. Her mother held her hand gently, giving small, reassuring squeezes. She didn't rush her or force her to talk. She just stayed close, giving her daughter enough space to breathe. The girl's eyes remained down, though she blinked more often than usual, trying to steady herself. Every time she thought she had pushed the memory away, it returned, replaying the woman's voice in her mind. It felt like the inside of her chest tightened and loosened again with each breath. After a few minutes, mother leaned toward her, keeping her tone soft. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "I want you to tell me what you're feeling. Don't worry about saying the wrong thing. Just say what's in your heart." The girl hesitated. She kept her gaze fixed on her backpack, as though it might give her the right words to say. She slowly lifted her shoulders in a tiny, unsure shrug. For a moment, no sound came from her lips. Her mother waited patiently, not interrupting or urging her. She knew her daughter well enough to understand that she needed silence for silence to gather her thoughts, silence to feel safe. Finally, the girl spoke in a faint voice, barely above a whisper. I don't know why she said that." Her mother's expression softened even more. "I know," she said gently. "And you didn't deserve it." The girl swallowed, feeling a slight stinging behind her eyes. "It made me feel weird," she said. "Like maybe there's something wrong with me, or with my bag." Her mother turned slightly in her seat, giving her daughter her full attention. She brushed a thumb lightly across the back of her hand. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with you," she said firmly, but lovingly. "And there's nothing wrong with your bag either. You chose it because it makes you happy. That's all that matters." The girl nodded, but her chest still felt heavy. It wasn't easy to let go of something that made her feel small. She bit the inside of her cheek gently, trying to keep her emotions steady. Her mother continued holding her hand, giving small, silent comforts. The woman who made the comment sat only a few seats away. The girl didn't dare look at her. She felt like if she looked, the moment would feel twice as real, and the embarrassment would crawl back up her cheeks. Instead, she focused her eyes out the window where airport workers were still moving, guiding carts and preparing luggage. Everything outside looked so simple, so straightforward. People had jobs to do, and they did them without worrying about uncomfortable moments. She wished she could do the same. Her mother noticed her glance toward the window and spoke quietly. What she said came from her, not from you. People sometimes carry things inside, then frustrations, worries, impatience. And sometimes they let those things spill out in the wrong ways. The girl listened carefully, letting the words settle inside her. Her mother had always had a way of explaining things that made them feel a little less confusing. Still, a part of her couldn't shake off the sting. "But why me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't do anything." "No," her mother agreed. "You didn't? You walked down the aisle politely, you waited your turn, moved carefully so you wouldn't bump anyone. You did everything right." The girl let out a quiet sigh. Then why did she look at me like that? Her mother paused for a moment, choosing her words with thoughtful care. "Sometimes people judge others too quickly," she said. "Sometimes they judge based on things they don't understand. They assume things instead of choosing kindness." She squeezed her daughter's hand again. But her behavior says nothing about who you are. It only shows who she was in that moment." The girl leaned her head lightly on her mother's arm. She didn't speak, but she felt the warmth of her mother's presence helping her breathe a little easier. The plane doors closed with a soft, final click. A hush fell over the cabin as the flight attendants walked up and down the aisle, checking seatbelts and making sure trays were locked. The pilot's voice came through the overhead speakers, greeting the passengers and giving details about the flight. The girl listened, though her mind was still tangled with emotions. Every word her mother said helped, but the embarrassment lingered, stubborn and unwelcome. As the plane began to push back from the gate, her mother reached into her small travel bag and pulled out a tissue. She didn't say anything. She simply offered it. The girl blinked slowly and accepted it, wiping a tiny tear that had escaped without her realizing. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered suddenly, her voice shaky. Her mother looked at her in surprise. "Why are you apologizing?" "I don't know," she said. I feel like I made things hard." Her mother shook her head gently. "You didn't make anything hard. You're allowed to feel how you feel. You're allowed to be hurt. And you're allowed to talk about it. You don't have to hide it from me." "But everyone else is fine," the girl murmured. "I'm the only one who's upset." Her mother leaned closer, speaking in a soft but steady tone. "Everyone else might look fine, but that doesn't mean they're stronger than you. And it doesn't mean you're weaker. It simply means you're honest with your feelings. That's a strength, not a weakness." The girl breathed in slowly. Her mother's words wrapped around her like a gentle blanket, pulling her away from the sharp edges of her emotions. After a moment, she glanced down at her backpack again. Her fingers brushed over the bright stitching. She began to remember all the times she carried it proudly. She remembered drawing the tiny symbols on the fabric, sticking badges on it after school events, writing her initials inside the small pocket. Each memory made her feel a little more like herself again. The plane began to taxi, rolling slowly on the pavement. Her mother looked out the window with her, letting her see the movement rather than the woman who had embarrassed her. The girl leaned slightly closer, watching the runway markers pass by. Her mother breathed out softly, then said, "I want you to remember something. What happened today says nothing about your worth. People sometimes say mean or rude things because of what's happening in their own lives. Sometimes they're impatient. Sometimes they're having a bad day. But their words don't define you." The girl nodded slightly, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood the deeper meaning. Still, her mother's tone brought her comfort. A gentle vibration filled the cabin as the plane prepared for takeoff. The girl pressed back into her seat, tightening her seatbelt slightly. Her mother placed a hand on her back, guiding her through the moment, just like she always did. "You're safe," her mother whispered. The girl took a slow breath and nodded. As the plane sped down the runway, she felt the sudden lift, the familiar lightness as the wheels left the ground. She stared out the window, watching the buildings shrink, the cars become tiny dots, the clouds grow closer. Something about being so high above the world made her feel strangely peaceful. The moment on the plane earlier still hurt, but distance made it feel a little less sharp. Her mother watched her quietly, noticing the small shift in her posture, the way her shoulders relaxed just a little. She smiled gently and adjusted the blanket on her daughter's lap. "You know," her mother said softly, "sometimes the world will try to dim your light, but your light doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you." The girl blinked slowly and turned toward her mother. "What do you mean?" "I mean that. Who you are, your joy, your creativity, your kindness, those things are yours. No one else gets to take them away from you, not with a few careless words." She touched the edge of the backpack. "And the things you love, they're part of that light too." The girl looked down at the bag again. For the first time since boarding the plane, she felt a very small smile beginning to form. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real. After a few minutes of quiet, she whispered, "It still hurt." Her mother nodded gently. "Of course it did. You're human. And when something hurts, the pain doesn't disappear just because someone else thinks it shouldn't matter. Pain leaves slowly, but you don't have to carry it alone." The girl leaned into her mother again, this time with a little more confidence. Her mother placed an arm around her shoulder and held her close. They sat like that for a while, flying above the clouds, wrapped in a peaceful silence. As the plane continued climbing, the woman who made the earlier comment shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She glanced briefly in their direction and looked away again. It was hard to tell whether she felt guilt or simply wanted to avoid eye contact. But the girl no longer looked at her. She kept her eyes on the sky. Her mother eventually whispered, "You handled yourself so well. You didn't shout. You didn't hide. You just kept going. That's something to be proud of." The girl blinked a few times, letting a warm feeling replace some of the sting she felt earlier. She couldn't say she was completely okay yet, but she felt steadier than before. Her mother's words worked slowly, sinking in piece by piece. As they flew through the pale morning light, the girl held onto her backpack again. But this time, she held it differently, not as if she was ashamed of it, but as though she remembered why she loved it in the first place. And as the clouds drifted by outside the window, she began to feel, deep within herself, that she would be okay. Little by little, she would heal from the moment that embarrassed her, because she wasn't alone, and her mother wasn't just comforting her. She was teaching her something important, something that would stay with her for a very long time. The minutes after the incident on the ramp felt heavier than expected. Even though the young girl had stepped into the terminal safely, something about the way she had been stopped, so suddenly, so sharply, stayed in the air. No one wanted to talk about it out loud, but people felt it. The girl felt it, and the flight attendant who had done it felt it most of all. Although she didn't show that on her face. Part 3 begins. When the girl sits down in the waiting area with her small backpack held tightly to her chest, she wasn't crying, but she wasn't calm either. Her eyes followed the planes outside the window, but she wasn't really watching them. She was replaying what had just happened. She didn't understand why she had been stopped when she had done nothing wrong. She only knew the attendant's tone had cut through her confidence like a cold wind. A few seats away, her older cousin, who had accompanied her on the trip, kept glancing over. Their guardian had gone to check in with the gate staff, leaving the two of them alone for the moment. The cousin could sense something was off, but didn't want to push. Instead, he leaned a little closer and asked softly, "You okay?" The girl nodded quickly, almost too quickly, as if she didn't want the question lingering in the air. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was thin. He didn't believe it, but he didn't press. "Want some water?" he asked instead. She shook her head. The truth was that she didn't want water. She wanted to erase the memory of the moment she'd been stopped in front of strangers. She wanted the warmth of the excitement she had felt earlier before the attendant's hand shot out, before the hard stare, before the assumption that she didn't belong on that ramp. Meanwhile, across the terminal, the flight attendant who had stopped her was standing behind the counter, pretending to sort paperwork she'd already organized. Her mind wasn't on the papers. She kept glancing discreetly in the direction of the girl. She hadn't expected the situation to weigh on her this much. She had convinced herself she was just following procedure. That's what she always said to herself when she felt doubtful. But this time, it felt different. She knew her tone had been too sharp. She knew her expression could have been kinder. Most of all, she knew that deep inside. She hadn't looked at the girl the same way she looked at other passengers. And that truth, even if she didn't speak it out loud, sat on her shoulders heavier than the airline-issued blazer she wore. While she wrestled with that, the airline supervisor arrived. He had been alerted about an incident by a ramp worker who witnessed the moment from a few feet away. The worker wasn't trying to make trouble. He simply felt uneasy. Something about the tone, the tension, the way the girl had recoiled it, didn't sit right with him. And so he mentioned it to the supervisor he trusted. The supervisor approached the counter quietly, greeting the flight attendant with a polite nod. "Can we talk for a second?" he asked. His voice was calm, but she felt her stomach tighten. "Sure," she replied. Forcing a smile, they stepped a little aside, still within sight of the passengers, but far enough to speak privately. The supervisor didn't start with accusations. He didn't want to embarrass anyone. He simply explained what he had heard and asked her to share her side. She took a breath. "I thought she wasn't supposed to be on the ramp. She looked like she was going the wrong way," she said. The supervisor nodded. "But the ramp worker said she was exactly where she needed to be, and that she was walking with the boarding group." She paused. "Maybe I reacted too fast." "Maybe," he said, keeping his tone gentle. "But we have to be extra careful how we speak to young passengers. And we have to make sure we're treating every child the same. You understand?" The attendant nodded. "I do." Her supervisor glanced toward the girl. She sat still, hugging her backpack, looking smaller than she really was. The supervisor's eyebrows curved with concern. "She seemed shaken," he said quietly. That simple statement pierced through the flight attendant more sharply than anything else. She swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to scare her. Intention matters," he said, "but impact matters more." She looked down at her hands, suddenly feeling exposed. She wanted to say something else, something that would justify her actions, but nothing came out. The truth was, she knew she could have handled the moment better, much better. While the supervisor wrapped up the conversation, the girl's guardian returned, carrying a stack of papers from the counter. As soon as the guardian sat down, she looked at the girl's face and frowned slightly. "What happened?" she asked. "You don't look like yourself." The girl hesitated. She didn't want to retell the moment. But the guardian waited patiently, and eventually, the girl let out the story in bits: how she had been stopped, how the attendant had used a hard tone, how she felt singled out. The guardian listened quietly, trying to stay calm. She didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. But she also didn't want the girl to carry that moment alone. "Thank you for telling me," the guardian said softly. "You did nothing wrong, okay?" "Absolutely nothing." The girl nodded, though her eyes still reflected uncertainty. A few minutes later, the supervisor approached them. He introduced himself kindly, explained that he had heard there might have been a misunderstanding, and wanted to make sure the girl was okay. His tone was warm and sincere. That alone eased some of the tension. "I'm very sorry if anything today made you uncomfortable," he said directly to the girl. "You were perfectly fine on the ramp, and you were exactly where you were supposed to be." Hearing the words from an authority figure made her sit up a little straighter. The supervisor wasn't just reassuring her. He was validating the truth she already knew inside. Her guardian thanked him. "I appreciate you checking in," she said. He nodded. "If there's anything we can do to help make your experience better from here, please let us know." The girl didn't say anything, but her grip on her backpack loosened slightly, a small sign of relief. After the supervisor left, the gate area became quiet again. Boarding wasn't starting for another 20 minutes, so everyone settled back into their seats. The cousin began telling the girl a funny story from a school trip he once went on, trying to lift her spirits. He exaggerated bits to make her laugh, and eventually she did just a little, but it was real. Her smile reappeared like a small ray of sunlight after a cloud across the terminal. The flight attendant stayed at the counter, watching all of this with mixed feelings. She didn't want to approach the girl and make things worse, but she also felt the weight of the moment lingering inside her. She felt something unfamiliar, kind of regret that didn't feel forced or defensive. It felt real. She began replaying the moment in her mind, realizing how her own stress, assumptions, and haste had shaped her reaction. And she couldn't ignore the uncomfortable truth underneath, that she didn't react that way to all children. The thought settled into her like a quiet ache. As boarding time approached, the atmosphere shifted. More passengers filled the gate area. Announcements echoed above, and the supervisor remained nearby. It's not in an intrusive way, but in a supportive, watchful one. When boarding began, the girl stood up slowly. Her guardian held her hand gently, and together they walked toward the gate. The cousin followed close behind, was joking lightly about how he was going to race her down the aisle once they got inside the plane. She cracked a small smile again. At the boarding podium, the flight attendant stood ready to scan tickets. When the girl approached, the attendant's breath caught. She looked at the girl not as a security concern, not as a mistake waiting to happen, but simply as a child who had been hurt by her actions. Her hands trembled slightly, and though she wanted to say something, the line behind them was long. The guardian noticed, but didn't stir anything further. She simply guided the girl forward. Inside the plane, the girl found her seat by the window. She placed her backpack carefully beneath the seat and gazed outside, trying to center herself. The terminal lights flickered across the glass, and the engines hummed in the distance. Slowly, the cabin filled with more passengers. Some were tired. Some were excited. Some were still juggling last-minute tasks on their phones. But for the girl, everything around her felt calmer than before. Being inside the plane meant the earlier moment was behind her, at least physically, as the crew prepared. For departure, the flight attendant eventually walked through the aisle to check overhead bins. When she reached the girl's row, she paused for half a second. She didn't say anything, not yet, but she adjusted the bag in the overhead bin gently and moved on. The girl watched her, Not with fear, but with a quiet curiosity. It felt like the beginning of something shifting, even if the words hadn't been spoken. The plane soon pushed back from the gate, rolling slowly across the ground. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and friendly, explaining the route, the weather, and the expected smooth flight. As the engines roared and the plane began to rise, the girl leaned back into her seat. The earlier incident still lingered in her mind, but the weight of it wasn't as heavy now. She still didn't have all the answers, but she felt supported. She felt seen, and as the plane climbed higher, leaving the airport far below. The story of what happened on that ramp was nowhere near over. The next part, not just for her, but for everyone who witnessed the moment, was still unfolding quietly, waiting for the moment when truth, accountability, and understanding would meet. Part 3 ends here, with the girl looking out the window at the clouds, breathing more steadily, unaware that a much bigger change was already beginning behind the scenes. The cabin stayed quiet for a moment after the mother finished speaking, as if the air itself was thinking about her words. The girl sat very still, her hands tucked in her lap, her thoughts moving slowly but deeply. Wasn't crying anymore, but her eyes were soft, like she was still figuring out what to do with the emotions sitting inside her chest. She didn't look angry. She didn't look scared. She looked like someone who was learning something about herself in real time. Something she didn't know she would need to learn today. She kept replaying what happened. The comment. The tone. The way the older passenger looked at her with that quick glance that felt heavier than it should have been. Only now, after hearing her mother's words, she was beginning to see the moment from a different angle. It still hurt, yes, but it didn't feel like a wound she had to carry. It felt more like a small bruise that would fade if she didn't press on it too hard. Her mother stayed beside her, quiet but present, giving her space to breathe and think. The girl appreciated that more than she knew how to express. Then, without saying anything, the mother reached for her daughter's hand. She didn't squeeze it hard, just gently enough to let her know she wasn't alone in this experience. The girl's fingers curled around her mother's almost immediately, as if they were made to fit there. A few rows ahead, the older passenger shifted in her seat. She had heard more than she meant to, maybe more than she wanted to. It started with a few words floating past her, then a fuller sentence, then the tone of the mother's voice. It wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, it was calm, almost too calm. And for some reason, that calmness unsettled her more than if the mother had confronted her directly. The older passenger stared straight ahead, pretending to read the magazine she held, but her eyes were not moving. She wasn't actually seeing the words. Her mind kept circling back to the moment she had spoken, back to the look on the little girl's face afterward. At first, she had brushed it off, telling herself it was just a small comment, nothing serious, nothing that should matter. But now, hearing the mother explain the impact of careless words, she felt something she didn't expect, a heavy, uncomfortable feeling in her stomach. It was guilt, plain and simple, though she didn't like to admit it, even to herself. She shifted again, crossing and uncrossing her legs. She cleared her throat once, then again. She glanced back subtly, only for a second, but the second was enough to see the girl leaning slightly toward her mother, still holding her hand. The sight made her chest tighten in a way she didn't understand at first. The girl didn't notice the woman looking back. She was focused on her breathing, trying to calm the small tremor inside her chest. She wanted to talk, but she didn't know what to say yet. Her thoughts felt like puzzle pieces still being moved around, waiting to fit together. Finally, after a long, quiet minute, she spoke softly to her mother. "Why do people say things like that?" she asked, her voice small but not shaky. The mother turned toward her, keeping her tone gentle. "Sometimes people speak without thinking. Sometimes they let their frustration come out in the wrong way. And sometimes," she said, brushing a curl away from the girl's forehead, "people judge what they don't understand. It doesn't make it right, but it's not your burden to carry." The girl nodded slowly, taking in the words one by one. She didn't fully understand everything, but she understood enough. She understood that the moment didn't define her. She understood that she was not at fault. And she understood that the way someone else acted didn't have to shape the way she saw herself. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she whispered. Her mother thought for a moment. "It stops hurting as much," she said honestly. And every time you handle moments like this, you grow stronger. Not because someone hurt you, but because you learned how to rise above it. The girl took a deep breath, letting the words settle inside her like warm tea soothing a chilled throat. She nodded again, more confidently this time. As they sat there, the older passenger listened unwillingly yet fully. She looked down at her hands, noticing how tightly she was holding her magazine. She loosened her grip. She swallowed. She tried to push away the guilt, but it kept returning. Sitting in her mind like a shadow she wasn't expecting, she replayed her own actions, the quick judgment, the sharp tone, the unnecessary remark. She heard the echo of her own voice in her mind, and it sounded different now, smaller, more careless than she meant it to be. She wondered why she had even said it. She wondered what kind of day she must have been having to speak that way to a child. But no matter what reason she tried to give herself, it didn't erase the fact that she had hurt someone who didn't deserve it. The plane continued to hum steadily in the background, the sound wrapping around everyone like a soft blanket. A flight attendant walked down the aisle, checking seat belts and offering small smiles to passengers. When she passed the girl, she paused for just a second and gave her a gentle smile, as if she sensed the earlier tension. The girl smiled back, a small, shy smile, but a real one. Her mother noticed. She didn't comment on it, but she squeezed her daughter's hand just slightly, letting her know she saw her trying. A few seats away, a young man who had been pretending not to listen looked over briefly, admiration in his eyes. He liked the way the mother handled the situation. He had seen people argue loudly on planes for far less. But this mother had chosen softness instead of anger. It impressed him more than he expected. The older passenger noticed the exchange too. It made her guilt grow just a little sharper, like a quiet tap on the shoulder she couldn't ignore. She sighed quietly, feeling her chest tighten again. She knew she should do something, say something, but the words didn't come easily. She didn't know how to start. She didn't know how to fix the moment she had broken. Meanwhile, the girl finally let go of her mother's hand and sat back in her seat. Her breathing had evened out. Her shoulders had relaxed. She still felt the sting of what happened, but it no longer felt like it was controlling her chest. It felt like something she could hold without it overwhelming her. She looked out the window, watching the clouds stretch across the sky. She liked the way they looked, so soft and peaceful. She wondered how something so gentle could sit above everything else, untouched by the noise of the world below. For a moment, she wished she could be like those clouds, still, calm, unbothered. Her mother watched her quietly, admiration warming her eyes. She saw the way the girl regained her calmness, the way she breathed through her hurt, the way she tried to understand rather than simply react. The mother felt proud, not proud because her daughter didn't cry. Crying had never been a weakness, but proud because she was learning to navigate moments that many adults still didn't know how to handle. Minutes passed like soft footsteps on carpet, quiet but steady. The older passenger finally closed her magazine. She stared at the back of the seat in front of her, gathering the courage she didn't know she would need today. She had never been the type to apologize easily. She often defended her actions even when she knew she was wrong. But something about this moment felt different. Something about that mother's calm wisdom unsettled the wall she had built around herself over the years. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I shouldn't have said that." The words came out thin, like they had been waiting too long to be spoken. The girl didn't hear her, and neither did her mother, but the moment held meaning anyway. It was the first crack in the older woman's stubborn pride. As the plane flew forward, cutting through the clouds, the cabin seemed to settle into a new softness. People relaxed in their seats. A baby giggled somewhere toward the back. A couple shared a quiet conversation. A man fell asleep with his headphones still in, and in the middle of all of it, a young girl sat quietly beside her mother, feeling a little braver, a little wiser, and a little less small than she had felt only minutes before. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the older passenger would say anything or pretend nothing had happened. But for the first time since boarding the plane, she felt that whatever came next, whether an apology or silence, she would be able to handle it, because she wasn't alone, and because she had learned something important. She didn't have to shrink herself to fit the comfort of someone who didn't understand her. She didn't have to carry the weight of another person's thoughtless words. She could breathe. She could rise. She could grow. And she already had. The plane continued its smooth path through the sky, and the girl sat quietly, watching the soft white clouds drift by like slow-moving ships. She felt calmer now, though the memory of what happened still lingered in a quiet corner of her mind. But it wasn't sharp anymore. It didn't press against her chest the way it had earlier. It felt smaller now, like something she could walk around instead of being blocked by. Her mother noticed the change. She had been watching her daughter in the small, subtle ways only a parent could notice: the loosened shoulders, the deeper breaths, the way her eyes softened instead of tightening. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched, letting her daughter settle into this new strength without interrupting it. A soft announcement filled the cabin, telling everyone they had about an hour left in the flight. Some passengers stretched their legs. Some closed their eyes. Others checked their phones, though they knew there was no signal up here. The girl leaned back in her seat and quietly opened her small journal. Her mother glanced over and smiled a little. She loved that her daughter always turned to writing when something weighed heavily on her heart. It was her way of sorting things out. The girl didn't write anything big or dramatic. She just scribbled a simple sentence at the top of the page. Sometimes people hurt you without knowing you, but you don't have to hold their words forever. She stared at the sentence for a long moment, not because she wanted to change it, but because she couldn't believe she had written something that felt so true to what she was learning. She closed the journal and placed it gently in the seat pocket in front of her. The older passenger still sat in the same slightly stiff posture. She kept glancing forward, then down, then forward again, as if she was building up courage one breath at a time. She replayed the girl's earlier hurt again and again. She hadn't meant to embarrass her. That wasn't her intention. But intention didn't erase impact. She knew that now, and the knowledge sat heavily on her shoulders. Finally, after too many minutes of internal debate, she took a slow breath and unbuckled her seatbelt. She turned slightly in her seat, not all the way around, just enough for her voice to reach the row behind her without being too obvious. She cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me?" she said. Her voice cracked slightly, surprising even herself. The girl looked up first. Her mother looked up too, her expression calm and unreadable. The older woman hesitated, then continued in a quieter voice. I want to say something to you both," she said. "Earlier when you were boarding, I made a comment I shouldn't have made. It was unkind, and I'm sorry." The girl didn't say anything. She just blinked, surprised that the woman was apologizing at all. "I shouldn't have spoken that way." The woman continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't fair. You didn't deserve that." She looked directly at the girl now, her eyes softer than before. "You seem like a very bright young lady," she added. "And I'm sorry if I made you feel small." The girl felt her stomach flutter with a mix of emotions: relief, confusion, and something else she didn't immediately recognize. She looked at her mother, unsure how to respond. Her mother gave her a gentle nod, letting her know she could choose what felt right. The girl swallowed softly, and then spoke, her voice tiny but steady. "Thank you for saying that." The older woman nodded, almost gratefully, as if the simple acceptance took a weight off her chest. "I hope you both have a good trip," she added, before turning quietly back to her seat. The mother waited until the woman faced forward again. Before she leaned toward her daughter, "You handled that well," she whispered. The girl exhaled, releasing tension she didn't realize she had been holding. "It felt strange," she admitted, "but I guess it was okay." "It was more than okay," her mother told her. "You listened. You accepted her apology with grace. That's harder than it looks." The girl leaned her head on her mother's arm, not because she was sad, but because the moment felt heavy in a good way, like she was carrying something meaningful, now something she had earned. Time passed softly after that. The cabin felt lighter. Even the older passenger seemed more at ease, sitting back in her seat with a quiet sigh. The guilt had loosened its grip on her. She knew she couldn't erase what she said, but at least she had tried to make it right. The mother and daughter settled into a gentle silence. The girl closed her eyes for a little while, letting the soft hum of the engine soothe her. Her mother stroked her hair gently, thinking about how proud she was, not because her daughter endured hurt, but because she showed courage in something so many people struggle with, standing strong without becoming hard, forgiving without losing herself. When the pilot finally announced that they were preparing to land, seatbelts clicked around the cabin. The girl sat up straight, feeling a small spark of excitement return. She loved the feeling of landing, the gentle drop, the tiny pressure in her ears, the way the world slowly came into view again after being surrounded by clouds. As the plane descended, the sunlight filled the cabin with a warm glow. The girl looked out the window, watching the city below come into focus. The buildings growing larger, the roads weaving like lines on a map. She felt different now, still herself, but a little wiser, a little stronger. Her mother leaned close and whispered, "You grew today." The girl smiled softly. "I think I did, not because of what someone said," her mother added, "but because of how you responded." The girl nodded, holding on to those words like they were something precious. They were. She could feel it. When the plane landed, everyone began gathering their things. Bags rustled. Seatbelts unclicked. People stretched. The older passengers stood up slowly and glanced back one more time. The girl met her eyes briefly. They exchanged a small, polite nod, nothing big, but meaningful in its own quiet way. The mother and daughter stepped into the aisle and made their way toward the exit. The girl hugged her colorful backpack to her chest again, but this time, not out of insecurity, just out of habit. As they walked down the ramp, the girl felt a lightness she hadn't expected. She had learned something she didn't think she would learn today. She had learned that she could rise from moments that tried to pull her down. She had learned that kindness didn't mean weakness, and strength didn't have to be loud at the end of the ramp. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulder and pulled her close as they stepped into the bright airport hallway. "You handled everything beautifully," her mother said softly. The girl looked up at her, her eyes shining just a little. "I had you," she whispered back. Her mother smiled, her heart warming at the words. "And you'll always have yourself," she answered gently. "That's the most important part." They walked forward together. Side by side, the girl's steps steady and sure, carrying with her a lesson she would remember long after the trip was over, a lesson about courage, about softness, about understanding, and about the quiet strength she never realized she already had.